But our next presenter is Fiona Graham. Sorry. Our next presenter is Fiona Graham, who worked with Professor Hollis Hammonds on a project that sounds fascinating. It's called Picture This, an exploration into the mind using a graphic novel. Fiona has also submitted a video that I'm going to share with you now before turning things over to Professor Hammonds and to Fiona for questions. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Fiona Graham, and I am a behavioral neuroscience major here at St. Edward's, and today I am, of course, presenting my thesis, Picture This, an exploration into the mind using a graphic novel. Before I dive in, however, I would like to thank my thesis advisor, Dr. Hollis Hammonds, whose support really made this thesis possible, and without whom I would have struggled so much more with the complex task of combining neuroscience and art. In addition, I would like to thank all of the teachers here at St. Edward's who have been working with me for the last 4 years to give me the knowledge to make this possible. And of course, finally, I need to thank my family and friends for their constant support as well. All right, I guess let's dive in. For my senior behavioral neuroscience thesis, I chose to create a graphic novel. In a little bit, I will go into why I chose a graphic novel instead of doing independent research or anything else really, but first I wanted to describe a little bit about what I actually created. Mixed Signals is a 29-page long graphic novel that is designed to tell a story while also teaching the reader about our brains, and specifically a process that occurs within all of our brains called the action potential. The story is about a girl named Emmeline, who is returning home to see her estranged father and learn about her medical history after leaving home 3 years earlier. In this scene, we can see her knocking on her father's door, about to see him. During her time away, she realizes she has a rare neurological disorder called dystonia, which is a movement disorder that causes bouts of loss of motor control, which I'll go into more later. In order to help her process her condition, she meets a young man named Doug, who has graduated with a degree in neuroscience and who's now working in a LAMS Plus. I'm going to get more into the actual plot and creation of Mixed Signals in a little bit, but first I'd like to backpedal for a moment and touch on my major itself and sort of what I've been doing for the past 4 years. Behavioral neuroscience, to state it briefly, is the science of studying the relationship between the physical brain and neurons and all that goes into our nervous system, and the way we behave and act and think and feel. In many ways, it's easy to look at behavioral neuroscience as two separate disciplines, biology and psychology, and even in the classes I took here at St. Edward's, often they would be very definitely biology or psychology class. However, what makes behavioral neuroscience so unique and valuable is that these two things are completely and intrinsically linked. Not a single thought or action you experience is independent of a physical process occurring in your body, and the processes that occur in your body are made significant by the effects they have on how you behave and think. To me, learning that all the things I do, the thoughts I have, and the emotions I feel can be explicitly traced back to physical changes happening in my body absolutely blew my mind. I think that it is part of being human to wonder why and how things happen to us. How does my heart know to beat? Why do I get sweaty when I'm nervous, even though that just makes me more nervous? Why do people have depression? Why do my arms move when I tell them to move? As little kids, I feel like we would ask questions like these all the time, but as we grow older, we can become disillusioned that we will ever know the answer, especially in a society where pre-college science education is designed to make productive workers or college grads, who go on to be productive workers, and where a lot of scientific information is hidden behind paywalls or jargon, meaning that individuals who want to access information about their health, but not necessarily get a college degree on it, are too often left in the dark. However, there are a lot of really cool initiatives happening right now to make science more interesting or accessible, such as the Crash Course YouTube videos, which cover a wide variety of topics using engaging visuals and easy-to-understand metaphors, or other graphic novels such as Logicomics, and I decided I wanted to jump in on that bandwagon as well, while also pushing it slightly further by making a story that stands on its own, even without the scientific content, that still incorporates and explains it. The information I decided would be the most helpful to the average person reading the novel is information about the action potential. For those who don't know, the action potential is one of the most crucial reasons that we are alive. In order for us to think, to feel emotions, to move our bodies, to have our hearts keep beating, to have sight, sound, taste, touch, or smell, our neurons have to be able to receive and send information in the form of electrical and chemical signals. And in order to do that, they have to undergo the action potential. This diagram is a basic representation of the steps and components that go into the action potential. Here we can see a neuron with little black lines indicating the path of electricity going down the neuron's axon. This electricity is caused by positively charged ions rushing into the cell, which occurs when tiny channels open in the cell wall. Those channels will only open if the neuron has enough excitatory inputs from other neurons around it. Once the action potential has traveled all the way down the axon and reaches the end of the neuron, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters, which then go on to communicate with the next neuron down the line, potentially triggering or preventing another action potential. This allows for communication between different parts of your brain as well as other parts of your body, such as if you prick your finger. It's neurons undergoing the action potential and communicating that allows you to realize that you're injured and in pain. I'm not going to fully explain all of this here, as it is a pretty complicated process, but if you want to know more about the action potential, I'm going to place a link to my comic at the very end of this presentation, and that is what the whole comic does, is explain the action potential. In addition, there will be other resources that you can use at the end of this presentation as well. In addition to teaching about the action potential, I also mentioned earlier that the main character, Emmeline, has a rare neurological disorder, dystonia. This is another subject that is really important to me because it is also a condition that my mother has, and which unfortunately has no known cure or cause. My mother and my main character both have a type of dystonia that occurs rarely, but which during the attacks is extremely debilitating, as it results in almost complete loss of muscle control as well as uncontrollable movement. This is part of what inspired me to write this thesis, as in cases like these, learning about the action potential, which is an important part of the disorder, may be about as much information as you're going to get. Okay, so I've sort of explained why I wanted people to know about the action potential, but why did I choose to do this in the form of a graphic novel? There are two main reasons for this, the first being simply that I love art and making art, and the second being that the graphic novel is a powerful tool for conveying complex topics. While historically graphic novels have been considered childish or perhaps less serious in other forms of storytelling, such as the novel, in recent years this perception has begun to change, not only because of incredible complex graphic novels that have proved this idea wrong, such as those shown here, but also because of a number of studies and accounts regarding the uses of graphic novels in an educational setting. Because graphic novels convey a story in two ways, with both text and images, they are able to convey meaning that either alone can't. This means that graphic novels are actually especially equipped to deal with complex subject matter, such as the action potential and the effect it has on our lives. In addition to just conveying information, the graphic novel is also just more visually interesting and engaging than, for example, a graph. Now, I've spent a lot of time explaining why I made my thesis, so let's actually delve into the thesis itself. The first step in creating a graphic novel is writing a script. I wrote about 5 partial drafts of the script, one of which had like supernatural elements, another of which was a true crime mystery, but I ended up deciding on my current, definitely more mundane version because I realized what I wanted people to get from it was an understanding of how the action potential affects us throughout our daily lives. So instead of focusing on a crazy complex plot, my real focus was on creating believable human characters and situations that readers could connect with and see reflected in their own lives. I wanted to explore emotions and situations where it doesn't feel like our body's natural responses to things are terribly helpful, such as feelings of anxiety and what we are trying to make moments of strength. My goal was to really hammer home that link between what is physical and what is behavioral. However, my plans, just like everything else, were drastically altered by the coronavirus. Because of the detail that goes into graphic novel pages, despite them ending up considerably smaller in printed form, the standard page of a graphic novel is 11 by 17 inches, requiring a special printer that I lost access to when St. Edward's shut down. This meant that I had to create the graphic novel completely digitally. Because I had only done digital art one time before on top of creating the thesis, I had to learn an entirely new art form, which definitely presented some challenges. The way I ended up setting up my comic was by drawing preliminary sketches on the left to help guide the design of each page as well as the placement of speech bubbles. Then I went in and drew the entire product without any color or shading, as I was still debating about what I wanted my final product to look like. On the right is the final product, which I decided to make grayscale and minimally shaded in order to establish depth while still maintaining a clearly stylized look. While I did not plan on doing my project digitally, however, there are certain things that I am grateful for about digital art. Because the art was digital, it allowed me to carry out some stylistic choices that ended up being crucial for making my story easier to understand. The story is non-linear, jumping between the present, where Emmeline is reuniting with her father, to the past, where she is deciding to leave her father's house, to the in-between, where she is experiencing dystonia for the first time and meeting Doug, her friend who helps her learn about the action potential. Because Emmeline often is having a conversation in a different part of the timeline than what is drawn, the use of differently shaped speech bubbles as well as different background tones was helpful in establishing whether a scene or dialogue was happening in the past or present. In addition, during the scene where Emmeline is having dystonia, doing art digitally allowed me to use inverse colors, both indicating that the scene is happening at night and also conveying the feeling of surrealism that comes with experiencing that kind of medical difficulty. In addition, this color contrast differentiates this narrative from the parallel narrative running alongside it, where Doug is teaching Emmeline about the action potential, again tying the molecular causes with the behavioral results. In order to give a fuller understanding of the work I created, I am now going to show you all a brief look at the pages themselves. Don't expect yourself to be able to look over them all or read them fully, as there is definitely not enough time for that, but I will be providing a link to view the comic on your own time at the end. All in all, I am proud of what I have accomplished, and I'm excited at the prospect of being able to continue doing work like this. Teaching is difficult, and I definitely found it more challenging than expected to integrate the science and the story, as well as make the information clear and easy to understand. However, I think that as the trend towards scientific accessibility continues to grow, my work and the work of others will grow with it. Continuing to encourage projects like this one in order to promote a better understanding and engagement with ourselves and our world is becoming increasingly important in an age where overall scientific knowledge is increasing, but the scientific understanding within individuals can be overlooked. The closing of both my comic and my presentation today will be a list of resources about the action potential, as well as people who are trying to create that engagement and spread knowledge to all. Thank you so much, everyone, and I look forward to answering your questions in just a moment.
That was really, really incredible. I think we're all really excited to hear more from you. And if it's okay, I can maybe share it. I'll have a list of participants, or I can put the link, or one of us can put the link in the chat. Would that be okay? And I can do that. I can do that maybe while Professor Hammonds says a few things. And if anyone has questions for Fiona, if you could put them in the chat box, that would be great. But yeah, Professor Hammonds, I'm going to unmute you. You're on.
Great job, Fiona. Yeah, I encourage everyone to look at the link that will be shared, because you can't see the quality of the drawings and the images on this presentation. And it's a really excellent project. Fiona did such a great job, and it was really a joy to work with her. And I'm looking forward to things she does in the future.
Thank you. And usually Professor Hammonds would get to give you your stole now, Fiona, but you know that it's in the mail coming to you. You'll receive it very soon. And we have our first questions coming in, so we're going to get right to that. Dr. Goldie is asking, Fiona, can you tell us a little about what you learned about the neuroscience behind dystonia? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually did an entire research project just on dystonia and the neuroscience behind dystonia, where I sort of set up a plan for a research project that I would potentially do one day, but I didn't do because I didn't have the resources to actually do it at the time. And sort of what I learned was that it is very connected. We'll see, there are many types of dystonia. There's types of dystonia that are very periodic and are full body, and then there are also types of dystonia that are constant and are only focused on one portion of the body, and the causes behind them can be different. So the type that Emmeline and my mother has doesn't really have a known cause, but other types can be linked to things like being triggered by caffeine intake or being triggered by exercise. And what both of those things, caffeine intake and exercise, does is it creates a sort of excitatory impulse in your body that your brain sort of loses control of, right? And so a lot of that has to do with neurotransmitters like dopamine and things like that. And I got really in depth with it in my paper, and I don't remember all of the exact little minute details. But I know that it is also sort of linked with epilepsy as well. And epilepsy is also a process where your brain just sort of loses control on inhibiting signals. So you just get too many signals going on in your brain at once, and it kind of makes things not work as they're supposed to be. So yeah, it's sort of a problem with inhibition. But with with dystonia, I think it's kind of interesting because you are, so you're still aware, but you can't actually move your arms, you can't decide to move your body. It just sort of moves on its own. So I would be interested to see if it also has to do with the problem of you're not able to create the excitatory impulses that would allow you to have that control as well. But again, nobody knows the exact reasons for why it happens, but it is related to things like dopamine, which is important in movement control, and other things like that.
Thanks, Fiona. We have one more question, or we have two more questions. First is from Meredith. What challenges did you run into while learning how to manage digital art versus more traditional non-digital? And then you have a follow-up question from Elliot. How many hours went into the drawing process if you tracked?
The challenges, there were very, very many. Even because I had done digital art one time before, and I described this more in my video, but then I think that another challenge I faced was creating the video, because I think that that portion where I discussed that kind of got cut out for some reason, but that's all right, I can discuss it now. Some of the challenges I faced is I had done digital art maybe one time before ever, and so even in just creating the word balloons and all this kind of stuff, I had to learn how to use all of the tools inside Krita, which is the program that I used. So that was really difficult. It's also just a completely different way of thinking about how you're going to place the images and the shading, because in digital art, everything is done in layers. So you'd have a layer that was your base layer, then you have a layer that you're drawing. And often I'd get confused and I'd end up putting things in the wrong layer, which meant that later I couldn't go back and edit them. So there was a whole lot of issues. But I'm honestly kind of glad that I kind of was forced into the situation, because it taught me how to use digital art, and that's a skill that maybe I would have put off, but this really made me like actually have to delve into this. So that's another thing I got to learn about. As far as the hours that went into it, I did not keep track, but I know that I worked probably at least 5 hours every single day for the past 2 months. I don't know what the math on that is. Maybe longer than that. So it took me a really, really long time. But it is something I enjoy, so it was definitely worth it.
Thank you, Fiona. We have, I think, time for one more question. And I also wanted to ask, I tried to type out from the screen the link, but I clearly am making a mistake I'm not finding because I can't get it to work. So if maybe you or Professor Hammonds could, if one of you have access to it, she says no. If you could put that, I know people would like to see it. And you can that can come in a minute after you're done talking, but you have a final question from Dr. Philippidis, who's asking, how do you think exploring the action potential through an artistic medium work together with your scientific study?
I think it was really helpful for me, because because the way that the action potential is sort of taught in a classroom is that it's a very slow process. It's little tiny bits that are done out over time. So in the end, you sort of like, oh, I understand this, because you've had so much time reinforcing these same concepts over and over and building up these layers. But like they say, you always learn things better if you're able to teach them to others. Mm-hmm. I have tried, and thank you, shout out to my roommate Meredith, to my boyfriend, to my mother. I've tried to teach them all about the action potential, just because I was excited about it. And I do believe that I made quite a mess of that, just because, it was something that I didn't really know how to express a lot of the aspects of. And even in the graphic novel, there are things that I believe that I wish that I had time to make a much longer graphic novel. It ended up being 29 pages long, but I wish that I had time to to extend it a little further, because I do think it's a little easier to lay it out in those steps. But yeah, it definitely got me sort of thinking about how, first of all, why is this important in people's lives? Why do people need to know about it? I think is probably the most interesting thing to me. And also, like, how can I talk about this in a way that people, can just easily and conceptually understand, right? And so I think that that's probably the way that has been the most helpful, and sort of, I think that probably the most important thing definitely has been, like, why does it matter? why do people want to know about it? Why should people want to know about it? What's the point? And I definitely think that it does. And yeah, that's kind of what I was trying to do. I hope that answered your question. I got a little carried away.
Fiona, thank you so much. If you would send us the link in the chat, I know I would love to see the comic, and I think everyone would as well. But thank you for this amazing presentation, and thank you, Professor Hammonds, for your support. But that, just from the little bit we can see, it's stunning. Thank you so much.
All right, I sent it. It should be there. Hopefully.
Okay.